Best Radio is online radio is either pre-recorded MP3 files or live via a microphone broadcast that are streamed over the internet. With Afrik Best Radio, we are not limited to one geographic area or dependent upon syndication partners picking up your show in order for it to be heard. It can be heard all over the world, global. The best and easiest way to listen to Afrik Best Radio on your phone in your car is via the appropriate app, Afrik Best Radio, official apps. Our website at www.afrikbestradio.online. Our partners that offer apps include Afrik Best Radio on Pandora, Afrik Best Radio on Last.fm, Afrik Best Radio on iHeartRadio, Afrik Best Radio on LiveX Live, Afrik Best Radio on TuneIn Radio, and many more. Just type Afrik Best Radio on any browser or search engine online. How do we promote your business? Afrik Best Radio advertising can help you to get so many listeners while they are busy in their daily work on can easily promote business or brand. They gives you voice to your brand. Others provide readers and experience that can truly define your brand and business. Afrik Best Radio advertising is different. It gives your brand a voice and reminds listeners about your product or service. Those who hear your ad can build a mental image of your brand based on the message you deliver. Contact us today for more information. English 00855 81 101. Khmer 00855-12-367-764, or visit our website at www.afrikbestradio.online.
Radio station in the world is right here, right now.
Hello and welcome to Storytelling. What do we have in store for you today? Well, for last week on Saturday, we looked at a book called Grimm's Fairy Tales and explored how stories were in the past, taking a look at some of those stories and seeing whether or not that this book would be for you. Now let's jump mediums a bit and move on from the art of storytelling in books, in written form as well as in written form, to another newer form of storytelling. Ladies and gentlemen and viewers at home, today we will be delving into the medium of video games and how they tell stories by looking at a little game called Furi. Stick with us and we will be right back after this break.
Afrik Best Radio is online radio is either pre-recorded MP3 files or live via a microphone broadcast that are streamed over the internet. With Afrik Best Radio, we are not limited to one geographic area or dependent upon syndication partners picking up your show in order for it to be heard. It can be heard all over the world, global. The best and easiest way to listen to Afrik Best Radio on your phone in your car is via the appropriate app, Afrik Best Radio, official apps. Our website at www.afrikbestradio.online. Our partners that offer apps include
the best radio station in the world is right here, right now.
So let us start our journey down the road of the game called Furi. And let us look at different ways that this game does storytelling as well as ways that it could have or hasn't done storytelling. First of all, to understand or to get a better look at what kind of game Furi is, we have to understand what the game is. Furi is a game that focuses on boss battles that was released way back in July 5th of 2016. This was released 4 years ago and it hasn't received that much traction, or at least not in the mainstream. However, it does has quite a nice following. The game was released by a few developers, part of a group called the Game Bakers, and since then they have been doing quite well. So the focus of this game is on boss battles, which means that most of the gameplay and most of the difficulty, the challenge, and the appeal of the game comes from these different types of boss battles. But actually, boss battles only take about half of the game. The other half of the game's runtime is put towards, instead of boss battles, this kind of walking simulator type of game. What that means is basically that for about half of the gameplay basically results as you walking down a path from one boss to another, while exposition is being dumped and while information is given to you. And while this is a good format to allow you to get a lot of information from one boss to another, to allow you to get some kind of pre-understanding of these different bosses and how you might want to approach them and how much you want to face them, in terms of storytelling, this is the weaker part of both of them. And when you look at it, you have two different types of storytelling in this type of story, or at least in the story of Furi. First of all, you have the game's main attraction, the boss battles. How do you tell stories through boss battles? Of course, you can have different lines of dialogues from the bosses, and they definitely have that. They have cutscenes, and they have lines, and they have different ways for the boss to interact with the player, even though the player character that you play as never says a word throughout the whole game. And yet, we still get the stories of these bosses through their dialogue. But dialogue isn't the only way that the stories are being told, at least from the boss's point of view. During these boss fights, there's also a lot of other things, a lot of other information that you as the player take in. Most notably, the different types of attacks and the different patterns of attack that the boss throws out at you. And let me explain why it's important to understand these kind of things. Because most games, it is important to understand how the boss operates and how they might go at you, in order for you to be able to counter and defeat them. However, in Furi, it's a little bit different from, let's say, some other games like RPGs or other kind of combat games, because in Furi there is no actual progression of the stats of the main character. From the beginning to the end, you have the same kind of movesets and the same skill sets. And another thing that Furi does is that it simplifies these movesets down to a minimum. What this means basically is that as the main character in Furi, as the player model, as the person that you're playing as, you really only have a handful of abilities. You have the regular slash attack, you have the regular shot attack, you have the charge, slash, and shot, and you can dodge and you can parry. 6 different moves, or maybe 3 or 4, depending on if you count the charge versions as their own moves. What this does is, first of all, it simplifies the experience towards new players, allowing them to think and to adapt to these type of controls more easily. But second of all, the way the game is designed allows a lot of depth that comes from these kind of basic kind of character moves. You only have 6 different type of moves, but the way that these moves interact with different things, let's say the environment of each boss battle or the bosses themselves, can vary from boss to boss and can vary from stage to stage. And while you do have a basic understanding of the moves going into each boss fight, you're not meant to win every boss fight first try. That is why something like the way that the boss moves and the way that they attack is important for the players to understand. And that is why Furi, by virtue of giving each boss such unique ways of attacking and ways of movement and all these different little details that the boss kind of just does, allows each boss to be characterized in a way that speaks to the player, at least, somewhat better than if it was to be expositioned or just to be told to you, which is kind of the other half of the game, the half which sees you walking from boss to boss as a narrator narrates your journey. Now, of course, I wouldn't say that Furi would need to cut this out, because in terms of relevance to the actual story, this part actually does play quite a little bit of importance. Not only is these walking simulators a chance for the players to relax after each different boss fight and allow themselves to cool down a bit, but it does give you a lot of handy information that you will not have without these kind of expositional dumps. And of course, you could say that the game should have done a better job and made it so that from the dialogue and from the actions of the bosses, everything could be interpreted. But again, this isn't a game that is focused mainly on the story, but rather on the boss fights. And with that, they do just enough of storytelling and just enough of action and just enough gameplay to kind of balance it all out. That being said, the walking simulator portions of the game are definitely the weaker sides of the game. While it is true that exposition is being dumped, and while it is true that you're getting all these information on the lore, on the boss, allowing you to expect what to come, allowing you to expect, or at least to predict how the boss will behave, and try to counter that, it does sort of take away from the vibe of the game. Not to say that these walking simulators are poor graphically, or that the story that they're telling isn't rich and isn't well written, because I do think it is, and the way that it is delivered by the character who is delivering the exposition is also quite nice, or at least in the English version. That being said, however, it does take away from the kind of feel of the game, and that is why I would like to draw at least some comparison between the actions, or at least the way that characters or bosses are presented in the cutscenes or in the boss fights themselves, and the way that they're presented in these kind of expositional narrative dumps. Do we have the first clip? So with that, we'll be taking a quick break first, and when we come back, I will hopefully be able to show you a clip of a comparison between these two different types of storytelling and characterizations. So don't go anywhere and stick with us, because we will be right back after this short break.
The best radio station in the world is right here, right now. Hear this. The best radio station in the world is right here, right
Listen
now.
to this station on your smartphone. Download the app now on Google Play Store.
Hear this. Radio station in the world is right here, right now.
Do we still not have? So, unfortunately, we do not have this first clip yet. But with that, let's move on with the program first, and hopefully by the end we will either have the clip, or I'll just explain what happens in this clip to you. So to begin with the next part of the program, let's roll the second clip. Mm-hmm. Is it playing? So while we're waiting for the first clip to start, a basic explanation of what you're about to see is one of the first scenes in the game. Basically, this is what opens us out to the whole story, and I want to have you kind of experience that and have you see how the game or the game developers decide to open the
Shake
story,
your head.
how that's significant to
Nod
the
your
game, and how
head.
that
It's time to go. See what they did to you? Pull yourself together. Get out of prison. Kill the jailer. Fight for your
And
freedom.
Basically, if you see this first clip, or at least if you see the clip of the opening, it's nothing really, let's say, it's nothing new, or it's nothing that revolutionary. All
Shake
it
your
does
head.
is give us a
Nod
setting
your
of
head. It's
what
time to
kind
go.
of story we're in, and give us a setting of what kind of goals that we have
See
to
what
work
they
for.
did to you?
It opens off with a bunny character, a purple bunny character, breaking you out of jail, and telling you that your mission is to be able to get from this point to the end point, which is basically the end of the game, by getting through different bosses. You're not given a number of how many bosses, and you're not told anything else. All that's done in this opening clip is that you are set free, and you are given the equipment you need to start it off.
out of prison.
Now, the significance of this
Kill the jailer.
towards the rest of the story is that it sets a tone. This bunny, as you'll later see if you do play the story, is the narrator or the person who tells us, the player, or the writer as well, that about the things that are happening in this kind of setting, in this kind of story that you find yourself in, at least for most of the story, because we don't, as a player coming into this, we don't exactly know what's happening, we don't exactly know where we are, and in this just short clip, we are allowed to know all that we need to know from now, at least until later on, until more of the exposition is given. And what we do find out now, what we do find out from this first scene is that A, for some reason we are locked up, B, for some reason we need to break out, and C, for some reason that this bunny is helping us. And so with the first scene done, we move forward and we get into the first boss. And now let's talk about some of the characterizations. But first, let's roll the third clip, which is of the first boss. So the thing with this boss is that right away you can see a few characterizations that allow you to understand what kind of person this boss is. Of course, from the dialogue, which is probably not shown in the clip, of course with the dialogue you're able to see that he thinks he's better than you and that he is the original jailer that is tasked to keep you in the jail. So first of all, we get his relationship to us, which is basically the fact that he has to keep us in the cell. Second of all, we have his relationship towards himself, or how he thinks of himself, which he has sort of a cocky persona, thinking that you can never get past him, and he actually says he's glad that you're trying to break out so that he can finally have some excitement. But third of all, you have these kind of like character quirks and these kind of character details that you might not have gotten otherwise if you weren't able to watch, or if you aren't able to see the boss moving. And that is that every time, because this game operates on a way that every time you bring the boss's health to 0, you actually take away one of the boss's lives. Take away all the boss's lives and you move on to the next stage. When you bring these bosses' health to 0, every time you take away a life from the first boss, you can see that his mask shifts around a bit. And that kind of signifies that these masks are kind of like his lives. And while this doesn't play a greater narrative to the rest of the story, it does give us a little bit of fun character details about this boss in particular, and about what he's like, and about kind of where he's from. That being said, there's not much else to say about the first boss, since he is not exactly the most in-depth character. He is what the game operates like, and how to use the basic commands. We have the second, and actually past the first boss we have the second boss, but that is the clip that we have just now. So going on to the third boss, which is the fourth clip. And the character of this boss, if we're able to get the clip running, is that of an old man who has the ability to stop and rewind and control time at his pleasing. And because of this, now we have these kind of character who is unprivy to consequences, who is able to reset things however he likes. And because of that, we kind of see the way that he moves and the way that he operates and the way that he interacts with us. And it's like that kind of way that he doesn't have to worry about making mistakes or anything, since he can just rewind everything. One of the things that you will see is that when you take away one of his lives, what he does is he jumps back up, but instead of just getting out normally, the way that is shown is that instead his time is reversed, and he gets up not by virtue of him surviving, but by virtue of him just reversing the flow of time to a point where he is healthier. There's also a few other things with the way that he battles the player and the way that he interacts with the player, the way that he talks, and all these things that show you that he really doesn't care about what's happening, because he knows that he has the ability to reset and he has the ability to just go back. And that is kind of taken away in the end when we finally defeat him, but that's a clip for later. That being said, we move on to the 5th boss. And this time, the boss changes a little bit. Instead of the death scene, now we're going to look at the beginning scene, because now this is another way that this story, or at least this game, tells a story. Instead of showing you what the boss does when they're at their lowest or when they're losing a life, now let's focus on what the game does to establish the boss in the first place. This 5th boss, when he starts, you're given a scene of him and the kid. And it is implied that this kid is his son. And based on his type of get up and based on the way that the exposition hypes him up, we know that he is a protector of sorts. And seeing that he has a child in the arena in the setting that we're supposed to fight and defeat him allows us to get from this that he is going to try everything he can to stop us, because not only is he protecting, or at least the rest of the world from as far as we know, but in this clip he is also protecting the life of this boy, as you can see from the clip. And that just gives us neat little character details about his motivations to fight us and why it might be that he might be giving it his all. This, coupled with a few other details about this character, such as his getup. He is one of the only bosses to use a shield that reflects our own attacks towards us, which reflects his desire to protect. And a few other neat details with color theory and other things that allow him to be seen as this kind of protector character. Now that the 5th boss is on the way, we move on to the best boss, the second from last boss that we face toward in this whole game, or at least depending on how you want to play it. This boss is called The Edge, and he has kind of a different motivation from all the other bosses. Now, to give you some context about this, this is the 6th clip we have, and if we can play that clip to give you a bit of context, unlike the other bosses, he is not in this to protect the world. He is not in this to try and stop you or anything. Instead, because he is given so much time to wait, because he's given so much time to just idle, he is in this, or at least in this fight, to see what it is that you can do and to see how it is that you can test him. And that can be seen in this clip where he goes into his final form, or at least when he gets into his final life. You see him glow in a deep red, and you can see him asking you to give him a challenge, and he goes straight into it. He doesn't want to win exactly. He doesn't want to protect anything. It's shown very clearly in this kind of interaction that what he wants to do is test his limits and test yours. And that is the boss of The Edge. So, ladies and gentlemen, now that we've gone through some of the bosses, we actually should be getting into the actual story. And stick with us, because right after this break, we're going to delve straight into the story of the game and see how different things change over time, as well as our main character changes over time. So stay with us and don't go anywhere, because we'll be right back.
Afrik Best Radio is online radio, is either pre-recorded MP3 files or live via a microphone broadcast that are streamed over the internet. With Afrik Best Radio, we are not limited to one geographic area or dependent upon syndication partners picking up your show in order for it to be heard. It can be heard all over the world, global. The best and easiest way to listen to Afrik Best Radio on your phone in your car is via the appropriate app, Afrik Best Radio, official apps. Our website at www.afrikbestradio.online. Our partners that offer apps include Afrik Best Radio on Pandora, Afrik Best Radio on last.fm, Afrik Best Radio on iHeartRadio, Afrik Best Radio on LiveX Live, Afrik Best Radio on TuneIn Radio, and many more. Just type Afrik Best Radio on any browser or search engine online. How do we promote your business? Afrik Best Radio advertising can help you to get so many listeners while they are busy in their daily work on can easily promote business or brand. They gives you voice.
It's right here, right now.
So we have come to the final stretch of the program. And let's take a look at what we've been through so far. We've looked at different ways that the game does characterization, and we looked at different ways that each boss is characterized, at how a few different bosses throughout the game is characterized in order to show you what they're like and to show you how they'll face you and all these other things. But now, finally, let's get into how this all ties together. And let's start with the main character, with the player that we're playing as in this game, a character called Ryder. A name that we don't get until the end of the game, but a name that doesn't really matter in the end. And here's why. As we've seen before, we start this game off in a jail cell, breaking out of it and taking on the first boss as this bunny breaks us out. Throughout the first boss fight, and the second, and the third, and the fourth, and the fifth, our character, the Ryder, doesn't say a single word in protest, in agreement, or at all. Now, there could be a few reasons that this could be. A lot of times in some games, or a lot of times in some open world games, you see that characters aren't exactly, sometimes they don't exactly have a personality, and this is to allow the player to see themselves in this character. And that could be seen in most of the scenes.
But you can be free here.
Everything else.
Look at what I'm offering.
Of the game.
This can be your home.
Because
I'll take care of you.
At the beginning of the game, you don't really get a sense that the Ryder has much of a thought process. He seems almost autonomous, as if he's acting without actually thinking about it, and that actually plays into the story. But this remains at least until one of the bosses, the sixth boss, a character called The Song, which clip is playing now. And unlike the other bosses, when you enter her room, the first thing she says to you is, "Let's take a walk." This offers Ryder a new perspective on things. For once, he's not forced into a fight, and he's not forced into a confrontation, but instead, he's given a chance to stop it all and stay there. And with this, the Ryder is presented with a unique choice. Right now, he doesn't have to go on, and he doesn't have to go on with his plan, he doesn't have to go on with his mission. The player at this point is offered a choice, whether you want to stay here and end the game as it is, or you go on to fight the Song, the boss in this scenario. And the way that this is significant towards Ryder's character is that up to this point, he's been working and he's been pushing through the bosses one at a time with such method and such efficiency that at times it almost feels like he's a robot. Of course, the efficiency which he dispatches the bosses off is directly correlated with the skills you put into the game. But if you judge with the cutscenes and if you judge with the way that the rabbit kind of interacts with you and kind of talks with you, you understand that actually it seems that he's going through everything really well. But then you get to this character, and finally, for the first time ever, you're offered a chance to do otherwise. And a little Easter egg here, the player can actually choose to stay with the Song, and the game will end here. But if you choose to continue, and if you choose to forge on, and you fight her, and you defeat her, you're greeted with a new type of, or at least you're greeted with something different in the ending scene. And if we can play the next clip, I'm assuming this is clip 8. If we can play the 8th clip, then we can see a little bit of the difference about how it is when it's finally time for the Song to get it. Is it playing?
Yeah. Now you say the automatic play, go ahead.
Okay. So, what happened there? It's something short. It lasts barely a few seconds. But in that moment when our character is supposed to dispatch of the Song, he hesitates. And this juxtaposes with everything he's done towards this point. As you can see with the rest of the clip, where he goes through the other bosses, he just dispatches of them efficiently, quickly, and just right away, with no remorse or anything towards how they might feel or anything like that. But finally, when he's offered a choice to do something different, when he's offered a choice to stop, finally he hesitates. And why does he do it can be left entirely to the player's interpretation, and this is also another one of the reasons why he's silent. At this point, you've gone through many bosses and you've gone through many different fights and you've seen many different things, but now he finally hesitates and he finally has a chance to stop. Of course, if you chose the pass and you get to the point where he has to dispatch of the song, you have to go forward with the game anyway. But you get the sense of what if. You get the sense of what happens if the character decides to stay instead. And this is kind of like progression for the character. It's a way to see that he's progressed from the point of autonomous work to a point where he actually cares, or he actually at least hesitates towards it. And that leads us to the final boss. 2 bosses or 3 bosses after the song, we meet the final boss. This is the 9th clip, and if we can get that to play, you see that this boss, unlike the other bosses, doesn't seem as competent. The reason being that this boss is, at least canonically, she is the youngest of the bosses and she is the least experienced. And you can see from that, as soon as she has to face our character, as soon as she knows that all the other bosses have fallen for him to have gotten this far, her first choice is to run away. This boss fight is different in a way, because our character, instead of going for it, or our boss, instead of going for it and trying to kill our character or trying to capture him again, they do something different. This time they ran away. And this whole boss fight, this whole scene, this whole sequence of events is the boss running away from us as we try to catch her. For once, we're the pursuer instead of the pursued. For once, we're the ones doing the chasing. And when we finally reach the end, when we finally get the boss onto her final life, she stops fighting back, which leads to an extremely easy victory, but one that feels quite empty. In the final stand, she doesn't fight back and she doesn't try to stop you. Instead, she asks you to stop, and that's about it, because she knows that even though the world will end if you get past, there's nothing she can do. And with that, the last boss fight, or at least depending on how you play the game, at least depending on where you stop, is over. And all that's left to do is move forward into the ending. But before that, do we have the first clip ready? Also, question, are the clips being played with sound?
No.
Can you play them with sound?
You want with the sound?
Yeah, for the first clip and the final.
The first and the
So as the first clip is being loaded up, I'll give you some context in order to get back to see, where we were when the first clip was supposed to be played, which is that we were looking at the 2 different types of storytelling that this kind of game does. The difference between the storytelling that's done within each boss fight and the storytelling that's done when you're in the between boss fights, when the character is speaking and telling you what's happening. And this clip is basically a comparison between the 2. The first being the exposition and the second being the actual boss fight.
They had to build all these layers so she couldn't get out. And you couldn't hear her scream. It drove her completely insane. Enraged, she'll hunt anything and rip it to pieces.
So if you see the difference between the first kind of set of clips and the second one, you'll see that in the first set of clips, you have basically what's happening is that the rabbit character or the bunny character is telling us exposition on what the second boss is kind of like. He gives us a few adjectives, how she's insane, how she'll hunt anything down, but it doesn't really give us context about what that would be like. And if this part didn't exist in the exposition, and if we didn't get it at all, what we would have gotten instead is purely the second clip, which is every time she loses a life, she delves a little bit deeper into insanity. And you can see with these 3 different kind of short clips that I put together that each time she delves into insanity, she kind of breaks free from her shackles a bit, and she breaks free from her restraints. And you can see this, and you can kind of get the feel of it. And this is kind of why I'm saying that the way that it's done in the boss fights and cutscenes is better done than the way it's done in the expositions, because this is kind of like after the first clip, basically, we reached the end of the game after the last clip we saw, where we finished off the last boss, and all that's left is walk through the portal and finally end up back in the real world. And if we can get the final clip to play, we can see that once we walk out of the portal and once we get into the real world, we finally understand what it is that this character, or at least all the characters, were trying to keep you away from, why it is that they didn't want you to get there. With this, we finally understand the context, or at least the reason that you're being held in the cell in the first place, so far away from the real world. And with this, the game ends. Wait, does it have sound? The game ends, however, it doesn't exactly end there. I'm not going to spoil the actual ending of the game or how it actually finishes off, but from what I've said so far, you should be able to at least get the general idea of how the game tells stories. Of course, there's an ending after this, there's a final boss after this, and all that good stuff. But the main thing is that, at this point, you understand how the story is being told by this game that's not focused entirely on story. You have different ways that it tells its story through exposition and through showing you in cutscenes and in the way the boss moves. You have different bosses characterized in different ways to allow you a personalized feel. Not only does this allow you to better predict their moves if you're able to understand that, but it allows you to get better invested into the story if that's what you're into. And not only that, our main character, the writer, has a character arc from the beginning to the end, which is something that you don't normally see in these kind of beat-em-up video games. But he has a character arc from the beginning to the end, where he goes from an autonomous killing machine to someone who at least shows a little bit of restraint, at least shows a little bit of hesitation. If there is anything that anyone would like to ask, or if there's anything that anyone would like to comment, please leave them in the comments now and I will get to them as soon as possible. If that's not the case, then that would be the end of our program today, and I hope you all enjoyed. But recapping it all, is Furi a game that I recommend you get? After going through all of this, let's just go very quickly into why you might want to try this game out. First of all, this game might take you anywhere from 2-ish hours to 6 hours, depending on how well you are able to adapt to the controls and the different kinds of bosses in the game. Playing it through again to get the clips for this video, I went through it all in around an hour and a half, and some people have done quicker. But if you do pick up this game, you need to understand that the commitment that you have to put in is around 6 hours long, which is not as much as books, but it could be more tiring or it could be longer, depending on how much you adapt to the game. On top of this, the game does have a price on it, and it's quite pricey, but I do think it's worth it if you are one of the people who like these kind of games. The story is interesting, the lore is interesting, the characters are all really well written and all really well characterized, and there's a lot to unpack if you look closely enough. There's a lot more than what I've said, and there's a lot more under the surface of the game, and if you give it a play by yourself, you'll understand exactly what the feel of the game is and what basically makes the game so good. And that's not only because the story is good and the gameplay is good, but it has a lot of depth and mastery to it, which allows you to replay it over and over again in a way that gives you a chance to get better and master the game overall. So basically, if you're someone who enjoys these type of games with boss fights, or someone who likes to delve deep into character stories and into lore stories, but you don't have as much time as needed for bigger games that might take anywhere from 20 to 60 hours, I'd recommend picking up this game. It's a little on the short side, although it is a little tiring if you aren't used to these type of games. But it has a rich story, its characters are good, and the gameplay is fun and enjoyable. Ladies and gentlemen, that is all I have for you today. Thank you for sticking with us, thank you for watching, and I will see you next time. Once again, we are Storytelling, sponsored by Afrik Best Radio, and we're signing out.
Files or live via a microphone broadcast that are streamed over the internet. With Afrik Best Radio, we are not limited to one geographic area or dependent upon syndication partners picking up your show in order for it to be heard. It can be heard all over the world, global. The best and easiest way to listen to Afrik Best Radio on your phone in your car is via the appropriate app, Afrik Best Radio, official apps. Our website at www.africbestradio.online. Our partners that offer apps include Afrik Best Radio on Pandora, Afrik Best Radio on last.fm, Afrik Best Radio on iHeartRadio, Afrik Best Radio on LiveX Live, Afrik Best Radio on TuneIn Radio, and many more. Just type Afrik Best Radio on any browser or search engine online. How do we promote your business? Afrik Best Radio advertising can help you to get so many listeners while they are busy in their daily work on can easily promote business or brand. They gives you voice to your brand. Others provide readers and experience that can truly define your brand and business. Afrik Best Radio advertising is different. It gives your brand a voice and reminds listeners about your product or service. Those who hear your ad can build a mental image of your brand based on the message you deliver. Contact us today for more information. English 00855 81645 101. Khmer 00855-12-367-764, or visit our website at www.africbestradio.online. Afrik Best Radio is online radio is either pre-recorded MP3 files or live via a microphone broadcast that are streamed over the internet. With Afrik Best Radio, we are not limited to one geographic area or dependent upon syndication partners picking up your show in order for it to be heard. It can be heard all over the world, global. The best and easiest way to listen to Afrik Best Radio on your phone